They have used a number of mechanisms to conceal their radical agenda from the American people, including Orwellian rhetoric. When they want to destroy the forest, they call it the Healthy Forest Act. When they want to destroy the air, they call it the Clear Skies Bill. But most insidiously, they've put polluters in charge of virtually all the agencies that are supposed to protect Americans from pollution. The head of the Forest Service is a timber industry lobbyist. The head of public lands is a mining industry lobbyist. The head of the air division at EPA is a utility lobbyist who's done nothing but represent the worst air polluters in America. The second in command of EPA is a Monsanto lobbyist. The woman who runs Superfund is a woman whose last job was advising corporate polluters how to evade Superfund. And if you look at all of the subsecretariats and agency heads in the Department of Agriculture, Energy, Department of Interior, and EPA, you find the same thing. It's the polluters who are running the agencies that are supposed to be protecting Americans from pollution. And these individuals have not entered government service for the public interest, but rather to subvert the very laws they're now charged with enforcing. The problem is they can do it secretly without the public knowing it. The president is not bringing these bills to Congress and saying, let's dismantle this, all of our environmental laws. If he did that, there would be at least some public debate on it. Now, we have a press in this country that's supposed to expose these kind of secrets. The problem is the American press is no longer doing its job. A journalist's job is to discern the truth and then convey the truth to the American people, and that is not being done by the American press. You can still today glean good information from the print media, but the broadcast media has completely fallen apart in this country, and the reason for that was because of the abolishment of the Fairness Doctrine by Ronald Reagan in 1987. We had a doctrine in this country, the Fairness Doctrine, that governed the American press, the broadcast media, since 1927, since the advent of commercial radio. And that doctrine said that the airwaves belong to the public. They don't belong to the broadcasters. They belong to the public. The broadcasters are licensed to use them, but only with the proviso that they use them to benefit the public interest and to advance our democracy. The Fairness Doctrine had three principal requirements. One is that the broadcasters air issues of public import. They would have had to talk about the environment or they would have lost their license. Number two, they had to show both sides of an issue. You couldn't have had a Fox News under the Fairness Doctrine. You couldn't have had a Rush Limbaugh or talk radio under the Fairness Doctrine. Number three, you had to have diversity of control and local control. And what happened is Reagan abolished that as a favor to these kind of right-wing Christian fundamentalist broadcasters and the studio heads who contributed so much to his campaign. This is a Christian heresy that they've embraced, and it's called dominion theology. And it's a belief, and it's the same kind of people who, use Christianity to justify slavery during the Civil War. You can use the Bible to justify, the most heinous crimes, and they are now using the Bible to justify the destruction of the planet. And they say, they believe that Revelations actually dictates that we should destroy the environment because that will hasten the coming of Christ. I mean, and this is, it seems so bizarre and weird that, you wouldn't normally mention it, but unfortunately, the administration is rife with people who actually believe this. James Watt, who was Ronald Reagan's Interior Secretary, swore under oath, testified before the Senate, and was asked, why are you giving away all of our public lands at fire sale prices instead of protecting them for future generations the way that your post mandates that you do? And he replied, I don't know how many future generations there's going to be before the second coming of Christ. And his mentor is Gail Norton, who now runs the Interior Department and has stocked it filled with these right-wing, I don't call it Christianity because it's not. It's a heresy. It's a heresy that, basically benefits the large corporate contributors of this administration, the oil and coal companies, but it has nothing to do with the Christian faith, as I understand it, and it, it's drawing selectively a few lines out of Genesis. This one line where God tells Adam and Eve to go out and dominate the earth and subdue nature. But Genesis, if you look at the overall message of Genesis, it's that the message is that we're supposed to act as stewards of the earth and that we're supposed to be gardeners and tend the garden and not to go out and destroy it. And today, the only constraints, what's happened since then is you now have 6 companies, 6 large multinationals that control every radio station in America and all of the television stations in America and 80% of the newspapers. They no longer have an obligation to benefit the American public. So their only obligation is to their shareholders. How do they satisfy that obligation? By expanding viewership so they can sell more ad space. How do you expand viewership? Why, you do that by appealing to the prurient interest that all of us have in the reptilian core of our brain for sex and celebrity gossip. So they give us Lacey Peterson, Kobe Bryant, Michael Jackson, and lots of terror alerts, because that gets viewership as well. But they're not telling us the real news that is affecting people in this country. And that's really the problem in our country, is the press has really, the fourth estate has let down American democracy and let down the American people. And the only way to restore that, in my view, is to bring back the fairness doctrine, to require them to start doing their job.
I've spent 40 years litigating against the agencies, the regulatory agencies in the United States. So I can tell you that EPA is effectively run by the oil industry, the coal industry, and the pesticide industry. When we sued, when I was on that trial team that brought the Monsanto cases, and we, ended up with a $13 billion settlement after winning 3 trials. But during those trials, we uncovered through discovery email traffic going back years that showed that the head of the pesticide division at EPA was secretly working for Monsanto and was running that agency to promote the mercantile ambitions of that business rather than the public interest. He was killing studies, he was fixing studies, he was ghostwriting studies. If you look at the pharmaceutical industry in our country, it runs FDA. FDA gets 50% of its budget from big pharma. The CDC spends half of its budget purchasing vaccines from big pharma and then distributing it. So it is a partner, and NIH essentially is just an incubator for new pharmaceutical products. It doesn't really do the kind of basic research that we want them to be doing about where are all these diseases, these chronic diseases and allergic diseases coming from, and autoimmune disease and neurological disease. Why are we seeing this explosion? Now, those kind of studies don't get done. Studies that do get done are studies that develop pharmaceutical products, and then NIH collects royalties when the pharma company sells those products. So you have the regulator that, is essentially a partner with the regulated industry. The DOT is run by the railroads in our country and by the airlines. The banks have utterly corrupted the SEC. I mean, I was watching what happened in 1980. We had a functioning government there, and we were in the middle of the Great Prosperity, and we had, most Americans trusted the government, and we all trusted the media. And today, 22% of Americans trust their government, 22% trust the media. The people who are supposed to be giving us good information are not. It's spin, it's propaganda. It's government orchestrated, and people know it. Everybody knows it. Everybody knows we were lied to about COVID. Everybody knows we were lied to about Vietnam. Everybody knows we were lied to about Iraq, weapons of mass destruction. It's not this. My opinion about these agencies is not happening in a vacuum. Everybody knows that pharma lied to us about opioids. A corrupted FDA, helped the pharmaceutical companies create the opioid crisis. This is a fact that is well known, well documented, and that happened. And the question is, how are we going to stop it from happening again? And the answer to that is we got to start by telling the truth about it. Everything I post is cited and sourced to government databases and to peer-reviewed publications. I have 320 MD physicians and PhD scientists, including until recently Nobel Prize winner Luc Montagnier, on our advisory board, looking at everything I post. So far, nobody's been able to show me anything that I've gotten wrong. And I wrote a book on Anthony Fauci that was the biggest bestseller in America for a year, not reviewed anywhere. And Tony Fauci, who's the head of NIH, walks it through the regulatory process at FDA and CDC, where he's picked the members of the panels who are all taking money from him. And they know their product is next in line. So I saw this process and how it worked. And it's beyond, it was regulatory capture on steroids. It was like, and then NIH gets the money. I got deplatformed for saying NIH owns half this the Moderna vaccine. They said that's vaccine misinformation. Well, guess what? On Thursday this week, Moderna made a $400 million payment to NIH for its share of the royalties to date. So, all of my conspiracy theories have about a 3-month shelf life before they become reality. And by the way, there's 2,200 citations, every one of them with a barcode on it, so that you can go, if you got your telephone there, you can look up the citation while you read the book.
Sounds like an invitation to a second session, maybe, that we can have later in the campaign, where we can get stuck into the detail of some of the science.
Happy to talk about it anytime. I know how to fix these agencies because I've spent so many years litigating against them, so they don't intimidate me. I know in many cases who the bad apples are, who the individuals are who have misguided it. But I also I've spent most of my career studying the problem of how do you unravel a corrupt agency? How do you fix it? And I'm very excited about doing that for my country, and I think my ultimate ambition is to restore, the faith and the love of America and the pride in America, that my children can grow up with the kind of pride that I felt about my country, and I can restore our moral authority around the world, and restore the reputation of America as an exemplary nation, as something that the rest of the world can look to as an example, and will want to that they'll want to copy rather than a threat. My uncle believed that America should be a leader, but we should not be a bully, and people understand the difference between those two things. And because my uncle steadfastly avoided war and instead said, I don't want the picture of Americans around the world to be somebody with a gun. I want it to be a Peace Corps volunteer. I want it to be the Kennedy Milk Program in all the countries in Latin America and Africa.